Do not give them ideas. Please, for the love of God, do not give Universal and DreamWorks ideas already. I have never sunk money into a live action remake of an animated movie. The exception of The Lion King 2019. Okay, I used free employee passes to go see that when that was in the theater in 2019 because that's when I worked at the movie theater. So I didn't spend any money on that. Unfortunately, I did buy the Blu-ray and the 4K Blu-ray back when I was obsessed, or it might have just been the 4K Blu-ray when I was obsessed with collecting. Back then, I wanted to rewatch them in order of when I first watched them because I was a little obsessive like that at the time. These days, I'm a lot better about that. I don't worry about that. This month, I'm doing a rewatch of the How to Train Your Dragon movies on the 3-year anniversary of the day I first watched them in 2022. Which, hilariously, the anniversary of when I watched the first one originally happened to be the day that they did the early access screenings for the remake. So it was my way of, I guess, protesting the original, the remake existing by watching the original and then publishing my review on Henry's Home Video Reviews on Instagram as counter programming, if you will, which takes me into this article I found from The Atlantic. The Cowardice of Live Action Remakes by David Sims. So you can see for this year's live action remakes, you've got the Lilo and Stitch one, which I have not watched. I will not watch. I did post that meme where Nani literally tosses Lilo to the side because I know all about the ending. For those of you who actually care and haven't seen it for whatever reason, skip the next 5 seconds. In the remake, Nani surrenders Lilo to the state so that she can go off to college and on the mainland. Yeah, very different from the family staying together at the end of the original movie. But before I complain about that, let's go to the article. But first, be sure to give this video a like, subscribe for daily videos, and comment your thoughts on how stagnant our culture has become because we're resorting to live action remakes like this. Well, the big studios are, and unfortunately, we're playing a part in this by supporting them with our money. Which I'm happy to say again, I've done very minimally, but I will never do again. Alright, there's a coincidental yet meaningful connection between two of this summer's buzziest movies. The new Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon are both remakes. Beyond that, they're both live-action adaptations of animated films, each of which happened to have been co-directed by Dean DeBlois and Chris Sanders. Wait, I thought Dean DeBlois was only for How to Train Your Dragon. Well, how about that? Chris Sanders and Dean DeBlois. Just like with How to Train Your Dragon. Oh my god. That is quite the coincidence. Getting back to the article, Lilo and Stitch has made a fortune at the box office since its late May debut. How to Train Your Dragon, which opens today, seems similarly poised for success. The two features are, if a little lacking in visual stimulation compared with their forebears, reliably entertaining, but taken together, they signal something rather alarming in Hollywood's ongoing crisis of imagination. The timeline for nostalgia is growing shorter. I mean, consider this. There's a Moana live action remake. It was supposed to come out this year, but they delayed it to next year because they didn't want to cause confusion with the sequel. They decided to put out in theaters instead of sticking to the original plan for it to be a Disney Plus show. But still, that is not even a full decade after the original release with the delay added in there. Seriously, November 2016, July of 2026. Not that long. I mean, compare that to uh I don't know off the top of my head what year Alice in Wonderland came out, but 50 to 60 years since the original came out compared to the Tim Burton version in 2010 that unfortunately launched this era of live action remake abominations. 25 years from Beauty and the Beast to the live action remake. About 26, I think. 26 to 27 years for Aladdin. From what I can remember off the top of my head, the Disney Renaissance live action remakes are generally what did better compared to the remakes of the very early ones. Except for like Cinderella. I know that one did well. And it was a remake of one of the ones that Walt was personally involved in. Since Tim Burton's big budget take on Alice in Wonderland grossed more than $1 billion in 2010, the live action remake has become an inevitable, pervasive cinematic trend. 15 years later, it seems that capturing similar financial success requires the studio to look at progressively more recent source material to work with. Disney's attempt to update the nearly 90-year-old Snow White failed at the box office earlier this year. The company shuffled efforts such as a new Pinocchio and Peter Pan off to streaming, despite the recognizable directors and casts involved. The muted response to these modern takes on decades-old classics, perhaps, explains the move toward reviving properties that resonate with much younger generations instead. So, more for the Disney adult millennials and then older Gen Z like myself. No, Gen Z, like the younger Gen Z would have been How to Train Your Dragons. Let's say they're taking from when they were 5 or 6 years old. Okay, what exactly is the nostalgia age that they're going for? Because younger people can have nostalgia for way older things because they were brought up on it, even if it wasn't like in the zeitgeist at the time. So, for example, me, I enjoy Star Wars. I was born in 1997, almost 20 years after the original movie came out. I was 2 years old when The Phantom Menace came out, too young to be able to remember all that. 5 when Attack of the Clones came out, and then 8 when Revenge of the Sith came out, and I got to see that on the big screen. Okay, I think 8 to 10 years old is probably what they're looking at. Maybe 5 to 10 is probably the age that they would want for. I think they want people who are nostalgic for what was out when they were 5 to 10 years old. So, Lilo and Stitch, I, as an elder of Gen Z, would fall right into that demographic because I was 5 years old when that movie came out. So, anyone who was up to 5 years older than me would have clearer memories of it and probably a little more nostalgia as a result. I mean, look, I was 5 years old when the movie came out, so I can tell you right now, Stitch was all over the place in the years after. I remember a Radio Disney radio dramatization of the movie that they did. True story. I remember the series on Disney Channel, which I actually watched back in the day. It was an entertaining show. The thing about Lilo and Stitch is it's actually appealing to both boys and girls because it has all the gross out humor and such for boys that Stitch provides, and then the whole family dynamic, the whole found family thing for the girls to enjoy. Yeah, Lilo and Stitch had pretty mass appeal. I don't know what else to say. So yeah, you would have had to be. So that means their primary demographic was born between 92 and 97, give or take. So the younger third of the millennials who might be starting to have kids. But yeah, their primary demographic is no longer just the children. Their primary demographic that they're trying to sell to is adults with nostalgia who'll be like, oh, hey, I remember that from when I was a kid. I'm going to take my kids to see this updated version of it. Now, according to Jester Bell, who I watch, Lilo and Stitch might not actually cross that $1 billion mark because the alternate ending would have angered enough people. And I've seen arguments that this reflects modern reality that today's 19-year-olds would not be considered fit guardians by the state. Unfortunately, I can see that being the case, even though historically speaking, they were the ones who were actually having the kids from the get go. I think I'll do a separate video about why we don't do certain things the way we used to. Like with older siblings raising younger siblings, because psychologists determined parentification was very unhealthy. But back to the article. The original Lilo and Stitch is 23 years old. How to Train Your Dragon, produced by DreamWorks Animation, is only 15. It also exists for the sake of promoting the Isles of Berk section of Epic Universe. I can tell you right now, there's probably like a little thing in the credits that says, visit the theme parks at Universal Orlando. I've seen something like that in the credits. I watch the credits of all the movies I watch. You let me know in the comments down below if you went to see that movie and if you noticed that in the credits. Next year, a remake of Moana will hit theaters less than a decade after the original film's release. Is that even enough time to start feeling wistful about it? I mean, I'm going to level with you. I felt a little nostalgic for late 2016 slash early 2017, even though that was roughly 8 years ago now. I guess because with the Switch 2 coming out, I'm getting some nostalgia for the Switch 1 launch, as well as the simpler feeling of being 20 years old compared to being 28 years old. But I digress. Clearly, the answer is yes, given how audiences have flocked to similar adaptations. The sentimental fervor around franchises such as How to Train Your Dragon is particularly unsettling to me because the first entry premiered when I was fully an adult. I was 13 at the time, but still, if they bring back something that you clearly remember, either you're it's either a sign that you're old or they're trying to get the younger adult demographic. So if this author was already an adult, he's probably in his late 30s, if not early 40s. Back to the article. The DreamWorks canon, which also includes such films as Shrek and Kung Fu Panda, was established when I was past the ideal age to become invested. However, I've seen How to Train Your Dragon many times because my daughter is a fan. That intense familiarity helped me out as I watched the live action version, looking for anything that might feel different about it, which would thus justify its creation. Not so much. DeBlois, who also directed the two How to Train Your Dragon sequels, makes his live action debut by adapting his own feature. As such, the end result is wildly similar to the earlier work. The new film is again set in a Viking village that is constantly besieged by different kinds of dragons. The plucky teen son of the chief, a boy named Hiccup, played by Mason Thames, befriends a sleek black dragon named Toothless and learns that fighting the beasts isn't the only answer. The actor who voiced Hiccup's father in the animated film, Gerard Butler, returns to perform the role on screen. In all other cases, the film uses well suited performers to replace the voice cast. Are they implying that Jay Baruchel and America Ferrera were not well suited? Well, obviously they're in their 40s now. There's no way they could play teenage characters in live action. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that they're both in their yeah, I'm pretty sure they're both in their 40s right now. So obviously there's no way they could play Hiccup and Astrid in live action. Getting back to the article, to my own surprise, I liked the new version of How to Train Your Dragon about as much as I do its ancestor. Both, to me, are above average bits of children's entertainment that struggle with the same problems. They start to sag near the end and suffer a little from their murky color palette. I got a little choked up at the exact same point that I do while watching the 2010 Dragon. When Hiccup and Toothless take to the sky together, the boy rides on a saddle he's made for his fire-breathing pal, and the composer John Powell's excellent score soars into inspirational mode, all strings and bagpipes. If there's a difference between these redone scenes and their inspirations, it's a remarkably minor one. Only good theater decorum stopped me from pulling out my phone and running the two dragons side by side. Hollywood is struggling to get people to buy movie tickets, so I understand the impulse to offer something that a broad swath of viewers already knows and likes. But there's simply no sense of risk in making something like How to Train Your Dragon. Nothing that will convince said theatergoers that the medium has a future beyond recycling. Yes, visual effects technology is up to the task of recreating a cartoon on a larger scale and dotted with real actors. And yes, these redos tend to turn a profit for their makers. These shouldn't be the only reasons for art to exist. Lilo and Stitch, at least, diverges somewhat from its source material. Because most of the characters are human beings, its world seems easier to translate to one composed of flesh and blood. The film, like How to Train Your Dragon, is about a shiftless youngster, Lilo, a Hawaiian girl who has been acting out since the death of her parents, bonding with a fantasy creature, Stitch, a blue alien experiment designed as a weapon of destruction. The director Dean Fleischer Camp's tweaks for his rendition didn't particularly click for me, however. One amusing character, another alien who is searching for Stitch, is absent entirely, and the revised ending has prompted some pushback, though Fleischer Camp has tried to defend it. Yeah, again, I can understand you're trying to reflect 2025 when it would make sense that a 19-year-old of this day and age would not be considered qualified to be a legal guardian. Even though I would argue you could write it to show that a 19-year-old technically can, because historically, 19-year-olds were legal guardians of children of their own by that point. That being said, again, it's a reflection of the current world. Like back in 2002, I'm pretty sure there was still some level of I think 19-year-olds were still considered a little more qualified to be a legal guardian compared to today, but I digress. In theory, I should be pro change, given that I found the carbon copy nature of How to Train Your Dragon so irksome, except that Lilo and Stitch doesn't really commit to its big alterations. The animated versions of Lilo and her older sister, Nani, forge a closer connection after meeting Stitch and his extraterrestrial hunters. The live action Lilo enters the care of family friends at the end of the film, so that Nani can go off to study in California. These adjustments to the girls' relationship are a bit bold because the prior film is so emotionally focused on their frayed sisterhood. Yet the remake quickly undercuts their separation with the revelation that Nani can just visit Lilo anytime she wants, thanks to some space technology that Nani has borrowed. I mean, throw in the ability to do FaceTime video calls, and yeah, it's not exactly the same. And I will admit to the people defending this ending, she did leave Lilo with somebody that she knew and trusted and would be considered qualified. Probably for the sake of doing it on their terms rather than the state being like, okay, you are not a fit guardian. Lilo is now a ward of the state. Bye. And then Nani would be unable to see Lilo. Okay, I can kind of understand some of the reasoning, but still, it goes against the whole Ohana means family thing. They should have dropped the whole Ohana means family mantra And family means no one gets left behind, if that's what they were going to do for the ending. That's probably the real problem here. Now to wrap up the article. Such a cop-out is the underlying, depressing reality with all of these remakes. No change can be too daring, no update too significant. It's heartening that Sanders, a co-director of the original Dragon and Stitch, is one of the few people working in animation who's still committed to innovation. Last year, he directed The Wild Robot. Much like How to Train Your Dragon, it is an adaptation of a children's book upon which Sanders found an exciting visual spin. The movie was a critical success, a box office hit, and an Academy Award nominee. Cinema needs more entries like The Wild Robot. Novel works that take chances and trust the audience to follow along. If nothing else, they provide fodder for more live action remakes. Nope, do not give them ideas. Please, for the love of God, do not give Universal and DreamWorks ideas already. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, time to finish the article for real. Cinema needs more entries like The Wild Robot, novel works that take chances and trust the audience to follow along. If nothing else, they provide fodder for more live action remakes in the near future. Hollywood can't have these nostalgic adaptations without something to redo in the first place. I have a better idea. More originals like The Wild Robot. True, you've got a point. They do need something to mine for what few members of Gen Alpha will be around. And I say that because I've seen Tim Pool's videos about how Gen Alpha is a much smaller demographic than Gen Z and millennials instead of being the very large base for the population pyramid. And then there's the question of whether Gen Alpha would really have the nostalgia because they have way more options right now compared to, let's say, let's say when I was that age in the 2000s. Yeah, I had theater movies, I had DVDs, the DVD rental store that I used to go to. I used to have cable was an option. Like if I were to go through all the nostalgia stuff they could mine from when I was a kid in the 2000s, there's Lilo and Stitches they have already done. But compare that to 20 years later, right now. I mean, they're already making a Skibbity Toilet movie, so that's definitely a thing. Pop culture has become fragmented. That's what I guess what I'm trying to say. And also, it's hard to compete now compared to almost 50 years ago now when Star Wars came out. It was like the thing because there was nothing like it. But yeah, on that note, I'm going to leave it here for the video. Like Tim Pool said, most likely it's because of the declining birth rate. There aren't as many children to market to, so they're marketing to the few people of millennials and older Gen Z who do have children, who do have nostalgia for these things, and they can be like, yeah, we're going to market to these adults. Hopefully, they'll bring their kids. And for those who don't have kids to bring, hey, we'll still get money from them. Hopefully. Unless they're like Henry and refuse to support these live action remakes with his money. But yeah, give this video a like. Comment your thoughts on all this, like how we got here in the first place, whether we can get away from this live action remake garbage or whatever. And subscribe for daily videos. I'll see you soon.